Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome to The Way of the Showman, where we view the world through the lens of showmanship. I am Captain Frodo, and I will be your host and your guide along the way. And I'd like to start by talking a little bit about our sponsor for today, and that is me. I have paid for all of this, and I have spent all the time for all of these 100 episodes or more, and it is my voice that you hear every episode. Sometimes you also hear other voices, and it is me who do all of the writing. I also do the editing, and I have made the songs which you hear the snippets of, and that might come out in another one of these celebratory episodes that we do every once in a while, like we did on episode 21 and episode 42 and episode 100, that are quite peculiar episodes, more artistic, more artful, more mythopoetic, and maybe we will do one where you will hear more about where these music comes from. But I've also replayed all the instruments on these tracks, and all that I want in return is to give this away for free to more people. I would love for these ideas to be shared by more people. So if you could tell your friends, make a post about it on social media, that would make me tremendously happy. Now, in the last episodes of the Showmanship and Play track, we spoke about neoteny. We spoke about how juvenile traits, like the childhood traits, the traits of children, are sometimes prevalent also in the adults. That you can see elements of the child in the adult. This is called neoteny. This is called juvenilization. It's and as it turns out, from what we've seen so far, it's something that is important for us human beings. But last time we started sort of looking at an exciting, I think it's quite exciting, the story of the great Russian fox experiment run by Dmitry Belive and Ludmila Trot. And we looked at there how they had to keep it very secret because it was illegal to do the kind of research they wanted to do. And what kind of research wanted they to do? Well, Belayev had the idea that he wanted to see how long and was it even possible to tame a fox, to make a fox into a dog. Ludmila did all the hard work, and she has a brilliant account of this in a recent book called How to Tame a Fox. Absolutely worthwhile if you find these ideas exciting. And what it turns out that is that after just 4 generations, these foxes started to have dog-like traits, like wagging their tail and coming over. And by the time that the research that they did actually became legal, the fox pups and the foxes were so tame that they responded to their names. So you could call upon them, and they pretty much behaved like dogs. So, and why were they doing that? They had because all of these traits that you see in pups, and all domesticated animals. All domesticated animals have slightly smaller brains. They have a slightly bigger eyes and all that. They basically look a little bit juvenile. Their tails are curled, and that was what we spoke about in detail last time. And Belayev just thought maybe they haven't been bred for those things in particular. Maybe there's one trait that you can breed for, which makes them all more social and more tolerant to each other. As it turns out, the thing that he bred for, what Ludmila selected for, was friendliness. If you breed for friendliness, you get all of these traits. If you choose the animal which is the most friendly, you end up with a fox turning into a dog. And at the end of when this kind of research, genetic research, which it kind of is, even though they're not doing genetics the way we think of it, is just selecting. When that became legal, and they had a big conference, a genetic conference in Moscow, organized by Belayev, then when he delivered this lecture about it, and he said in the end that this thing that happens with foxes, of how you can turn them into dog with domestication, can also happen with human beings. And that is what we looked a little bit at last time, and that is where we pick up the baton and take it into this episode's world of ideas. And in the second part of We Are the Children, we're going to start by talking about the furious pace of life. Because today's reality, everyday life, is so rapidly changing that it is hard to keep up. Information comes at a speed which our parents' generation, and for my generation, myself in particular, find hard to understand. Our technology is beginning to be outdated before it's even packaged to be shipped to us consumers. In this chaos, one needs to be able to adapt quickly and to take on new information and input with passion and playfulness. The stories of people getting rich on the latest app or internet trend, or even the boyish mad inventor energy of someone like Elon Musk, say what we say no more, is characterized by a childlike or youthful personality type. Now, this attitude was important back when our ancestors, and so forth, first left the trees and headed out onto the African savanna. But in today's sped-up, ever-changing world, having these traits seems even more apt. We could maybe go so far as to say that some of the most successful contemporary individuals never really become adults. That goes for both good and bad. Peter Pan, that's not necessarily all the happy story. And there is a childlikeness where we still need to have the morals evolve. I'm adding this right now, but let's just leave that out for now and look at how We Are the Children, which after all should have been the topic of both of these, which it has been, but now let's get into that. And I think that play is the key, the very key to adapting us to our immediate environments. It's the strategy best suited to teach us to function in the ever-changing world. It's nature's way for adapting ourselves beyond what specifics we can be given genetically. We enter the world unfinished. We don't know who we are. We don't know the world. Play is what teaches us about both of those, who we are and about the world, and also the endless kinds of relationships that there are. Love allows for the space where play can flourish. We've spoken about that. And love is the soil where the seed of free play grows. The love of our parents affords us the relaxed field, the area of interest where we can pursue what we want to do, not just what we have to do. The great illusion is that there comes a point, around 8 weeks for the foxes, or sometime after puberty for us, where biology tells us, that's it, you've played enough. You know enough to achieve your primary objectives. You're equipped to survive and procreate. So now, do so. Go forth and multiply. So biology brings online impulses that changes our objective from following our inner motivation, from having fun, not being so focused on playing within the boundaries, but rather playing with the boundaries. And it sends us down a, in quotation, serious path. We're going to question seriousness in a later episode. But we're a serious path where we do what we need to do to stay alive and then secure the continuation of our lineage, and that is the primary modus operandi. But what if we were never done learning, never done curiously exploring and examining new and playful ways of being? What if playing all along the way was the particular human trait which would guide our steps? As I said, be fruitful and multiply. That's what God said in Genesis. And then he continues with, and fill the earth and subdue it. And scholars seems to think that the book of Genesis not only is the first book in the Bible, but also that it is the first one to be written down at around 3,400 years ago. Well, as a book. Anyway, I don't know anything about these things, but I do like to read into it. So what we're saying is that this part of the Bible, one of the Torahs, it's a really old book, which might be giving us some very old advice. It's maybe then not surprising that this advice, if followed unquestioningly, will lead to a complete depletion of Earth's resources. Fill the earth and subdue it. Yeah. In 2005, Edward O. Wilson, the evolutionary biologist, coined the acronym HIPPO to summarize the threats to biodiversity. What is it that is threatening biodiversity in the world? The threats in this HIPPO, which is the acronym, the threats are ordered in descending order of importance, where the H is for habitat loss, where I is for invasive species, where P is for pollution, and P, the second P, is for human population, and O is for overharvesting. And upon some reflection, though, I believe that we find that humans are the primary factor in all those 5 categories. Habitat loss, that's because we're chopping stuff down. Invasive species is because it's being moved around by us. There's more to it than that, of course, but we play an important part. Pollution, yeah, it's not the porcupine who's responsible for that. And second P, human population, there's just more and more and more of us, so we need more and more of everything. And that leads to the last one, the O, which is overharvesting. We're harvesting everything that's there, and it's not sustainable. So it might be true that habitat loss is the main reason that we're losing our biodiversity at a rate that's not unlike that of the extinction that wiped out the dinosaurs. And the main reason for it isn't an asteroid, it's us. The main parts of the pollution is produced by us. Reasons for overharvesting is not due to the whales eating the oceans empty of fish, it's our industrial-style fishing fleets. Humans are behind all of these. Arguably, we're not the sole culprits, but we are far from blameless. The difference, though, in this is that if the whales have their share of the blame and the volcanoes have their share of the blame, they can't do anything about it. But we can. So the decree to go forth and multiply is important as a first step, but it is not the end of the story. To the defense of the Bible, there was a sequel to the Old Testament, which commonly is published as one book, and that is the New Testament. And one important theme which is brought up in the sequel is love. What Jesus highlights is the importance of loving thy neighbor as thyself. He talks about forgiveness and all kinds of nice stuff. But let's leave the Bible behind and just focus back on evolution. Is it not as if evolution's selfish genes, as Dawkins so famously put it, will procreate and do whatever it can to replicate itself, and that this should only be the first step, like go forth and procreate? There's some similarity there, I see anyway. And surely anyone can't seriously argue that that is all there is to life. Go forth and multiply. I mean, unless you really put a lot of what do you call it, interpretation into the go forth, then procreate. I mean, I'm all for procreation, or at least, you could do a lot of practice, and then maybe not procreate every time. I think that's a good idea. But all life goes forth and it procreates, or else it will cease to exist. So, but this is not the only way to look at evolution. If we look back at the history of life, we can just about make out a thread, not just of nature red in tooth and claw, where everyone is fighting for their own survival and it's a huge battle. We can also find this thread of cooperation and increased degrees of freedom. So if we don't place our focus on the great war of all against all, where more offspring is born than parents can feed, so that the only ones who happens to be that little bit better at survival in their environment will live long enough to have their own offspring. If we don't focus on that, what we have seen, then we'll see something else. And what we have seen here in this exploration of play and our own species evolution is that we are the most complexly social species of all. Our eyes have changed the way they look to aid us in communication, which we've spoken about. We leak or deliberately express our feelings through our face. Like we leak our emotions out so people can see what we feel. They can see on the outside what's going on our inside. So this is like our body language and everything, gestures, and so let alone the fact that we can actually reveal then through spoken language, through song and dance and painting, we can express everything and we can share so much. So it's impossible to single out. So anyway, this is just to look at. We can look at other facts and other aspects of it, not just the fighting. It's impossible to single out one thing that is the defining trait of humanity. We are so endlessly much. As the pastor says in the funeral scene of Synecdoche, New York, everything is more complicated than you think. You only see a tenth of what is true. And no matter what we try to express, it'll only capture a fracture of a fragment of reality's true complexity. And that said, I have so far been pulling on and focusing on a way to look at the deepest origins of the showman, or indeed of humanity itself. And in this view, the defining feature of our species is I believe, our childlike ability to playfully go into the world. Not just go forth and multiply, but to go forth playfully. We are a species that is made up of, and in many ways defined by, our ability to retain our childlike traits into adulthood. The inner child that we hear so much about, that's hidden inside each of us, might not be quite as hidden as we think. As it turns out, we as a species, Homo sapiens, we look like children. So after that little sojourn of trying to put this into place, of going forth as just following the similarity between the biblical and the evolutionary program of just going forth and multiply and just dominate, and it's like, this is not the idea anymore. And the traits that will perhaps take us into the future is perhaps found in play, which is the work of the child. And so now let's look a little bit more at what it is like when I say we look like children, and why. What does it mean that we have a juvenile appearance? Adult human beings looks remarkably like bigger versions of ourselves as children. And this is particularly the case when you look at the great difference that takes place in the head shapes and the facial shapes between an infant and an adult chimpanzee, which we'll get back to very soon. But we basically don't have huge morphological changes to our faces or to anything. We look quite similar from adults to when we become adults, and that is not the case for chimpanzees. That's what I'm saying there. So going back to talk a little bit about Ashley Montague, it was he was the guy that had comprehensive list of traits that we heard of, the 27 human behavioral needs that we talked about a few episodes ago. And he has a list in the back of his book of specific juvenile traits, things that juveniles that you see in the young that we also see in adult humans. And he lists things like the roundness of our heads, small jaws, small face, flatness of the face, meaning that it's just our face is relatively flat. Thin nails, large size of brain relative to body, lack of heavy brow ridges, which also separates us from Neanderthals and then chimpanzees, of course, and the fact that our head is situated right over the top of our spine, which again gives us this erect posture. Montague also mentioned small teeth, late eruption of our adult teeth, and gracile skeletons, as in fine skeletons, not these massively robust things like in a gorilla or whatever. Relative hairlessness, and the list just goes on and on. But it's a striking thing to look at. Anyway, just a comment on that list. It is that these are things that then, focusing on chimpanzees because they are our closest living relative, this trait, all of these things that we've got, these are the traits of adulthood or whatever in human beings, and they're all juvenile traits, things that you see in the young that continues into adulthood. Basically, we look like children, whilst that's not the case for the chimpanzees, because it's a striking thing to look at the shape of a chimpanzee infant's head alongside an adult human head, because the similarity is eerie. The baby chimpanzee has what we think of as a characteristic human high forehead with a face, and the forehead gives a kind of vertical look. And as time passes, the jaw of the chimpanzee continues to grow and then protrudes more and more, and it becomes substantially more prominent than the cranium or the top of the head. I mean, and it's growing forward, and this gives the chimpanzee this characteristic backwards sloping head and facial shape, where the front of the face is, as in the very furthest bit of the face that's at the front, is significantly further forward than the top of the head. And I'm tempted to say from chin to top of head, only that chimpanzees doesn't have a chin. Humans are the only primate with a chin, which is a mystery for self-study, where you can stroke your chin and ponder, why am I the only one to have this feature to stroke? But you have to study that on your own time. The point is that when we look at the baby chimp, the general shape of its head is the shape of an adult human head. We look like juvenile chimps in the same way a dog looks like a wolf puppy. In his book, Humankind, A Hopeful History, Rutger Bregman calls us Homo puppy, which sounds like a weak and fragile thing. Yet, as we see from our rapid expansion and world domination and dominion, sanctioned by God or biology, as we jokingly looked at, then we are actually far from weak. We are, if anything, more powerful than we know how to handle. So we look like children. Is there also more to it than that? Our inner children? Let's look at what as ourselves as inner children. Because we look as children, but more than that, we have in us the full potential of the child. And this child that we have within us is a much maligned being, I think. We lock it in schools, and we tell it to stop being childish and to grow up, and that we tell them that they should be seen but not heard, and that they should sit still and color only within the lines. And the inner child is the sensibilities. The inner child is the sensibilities and the playful attitude and the ability to learn. It is the deep trait so particular to us and the evolution of our species. It is the internalization of the features of childhood that we have looked at playing, at learning and connecting with others. It stands to reason that depending on our individual reality, situation, and our own quirks of character, the inner child might suffer very different fates. Some people are in families where childlike or childish behaviour, such as imaginative play, role-playing and curiosity in the form of endless questions, might be discouraged, whilst in other family situations this might be encouraged. Some of us, and we all know them, have completely lost their own contact with their own inner child. They've lost the contact with the playful inside themselves. They're serious, sour-faced, and worries only about what's serious, hence important, which is a link we're going to question later. But they care about numbers and money and neckties and making sure that everything is done for reasons. It's going to be done for a reason, so as to not waste any time. It is also striking that when people are unhappy, Many of the things that they seem to miss are the features of childhood, and which we find as characteristics of play. When we are unhappy or stressed, we feel tense. We feel like we have lost the passion for doing stuff. Things become meaningless. We lose a desire to finish what we start and don't want to start anything new. We become self-conscious and find it hard to imagine that we would ever want to be wholeheartedly engaged in any activity ever again. And the other side of this coin is how we find the moments where we are the most in touch with our inner child. When we play, when we have fun, when we engage in something wholeheartedly simply because you want it and it's intensely enjoyable and meaningful. These are the moments which we frequently think of and cite as the most important moments in our lives. Let's say you went on a trip to the beach and you and your friends, for inexplicable reasons, got into a great and invigorating conversation with something that involved into an empty box of wine being thrown around and used as a ball, and before you knew it, the whole gang was frolicking and playing in the waves. These are the moments where we feel the most alive, the moments where we're most happy, and chances are that a good portion of these moments that you will cite as your best moments will be playful moments, fully engaged in what's going on in that moment. A child can get completely consumed by their activity, regardless of what it is. Not if you force it to do it, but if it's self-motivated. There we have that criteria again. Criteria 3. This, as we saw, we've got all these different things. If it's fun, that is from the list of characteristics. So the way that we get fully absorbed in anything for its own sake, then we are in it and we're into it because it is fun in itself. When we find the fun in itself as well. When we play, we don't need any other reason, and the meaning in the activity is the same as doing it. We do not look for meaning beyond it because we are completely engaged in it. Adults likes to ask children about, what do you want to be when you grow up? And usually the child is already engaged and completely immersed in some elaborate game where everything in the room has acquired some other significance. The chairs are cars and the table is a high-riser and which is on fire, and the child is a firefighter. And then a question comes about this strange place that only adults worry about. The future. Where will you be in the future? The concept is abstract, and the question of what the child will be, it is quite incomprehensible. The child is not thinking about what it will become because it is completely and fully engaged in being. It's not become, it is becoming all the way along, but whilst becoming, it's fully engaged in just being. And in that moment, that child is more fully realized and complete in its experience of the world than us adults are for the absolute majority of our lives. The question that should be asked by the adult to the child is not, when will you become like me? But, how did I ever lose the ability to be like you? The inner child can certainly sound trite as a hippy-dippy pop psychology invention, but this does not mean that we can't back it up by many good lines of good, hard, solid and adult reasoning. Like how research indicates that play is positively linked to brain development. Neurons are firing and wiring in our brains at a very high rate when we are engaged in play. And this thing, neurons fire together, wire together, that's the key concept in neuroplasticity of being able to regenerate and learn new things and literally regenerate parts of your brain. Now, play in that way, looked at in that way, play literally makes us smarter. It stimulates our frontal cortex and our cerebellum as well. The frontal cortex is responsible for what we call the higher cognitive functions, such as memory and emotions and impulse control, problem solving, social interaction and motor function. And the cerebellum coordinates voluntary movements such as posture, balance, coordination and speech, resulting in smooth and balanced muscular activity. And apparently, there seems to be good evidence for a link between the size of the cerebellum and the amount of time an animal engages in play. And all this adds up to the underlying fact that play aids the development of cognitive and behavioral abilities in primates. And us being primates, yeah, you make that leap yourself. Play stimulates and improves memory and learning as well, which is of absolute paramount importance in our early development. This is most important in our early years, but research and also from my own anecdotal experience, play continues to be important and beneficial at any age. And the incredibly powerful drive to play in childhood indicates that biologically it is of unparalleled importance at this stage as a child. But as a rule of thumb, nature organizes it so that what is necessary for survival is reflected in powerful desires at the times when it is most necessary, and play is vitally important in childhood when our need is strongest to adapt to the chaos of life. But for the inner child and the outer children running around in the forest and neighborhoods, all this stuff about brain development and learning and benefits to physiology and psychologically being well adapted and in general well-being, then all of this is completely irrelevant. I'm just like skimming through some of the that. There's a book that I read that's just specifically about the neurobiology of play, and it's can be a bit hard going, but it's just article upon article of people who just give this is what happens with play, and these are the most important things in human life, and they're just in human well-being. It just keeps backing up. You can look into that yourself, but telling you here in the short terms, because I don't know, try to make a little synopsis to hopefully give you some weighty arguments so that when we talk about play, we're going to think of it not as just something supplementary that happens on the side, but as in a key feature of what we are and key important feature. So kids, though, they don't care about any of these things, the fact that they do all that. They need no other reason than the sheer joy of actually doing it. Without ever hearing they don't have to hear Professor Joseph Campbell, the author of the influential Hero with 1,000 Faces, that he says, if you follow your bliss, you put yourself on a kind of track that has been there all the while waiting for you, and the life that you ought to be living is the one that you are living. So, follow your bliss. And what we have seen here is that there is a very, very close link between following your bliss and being playful. You're not living your best life. You're not in bliss if you don't have fun. If you're not doing something that's just apparently purposeless, it's done for its own sake, for your own engagement in it. If it's not self-motivated, that is you that want to do it, and it's voluntarily done because you want it. And if it doesn't have these rules that you can play with, and that it has, and if it's not imaginative and improvisational, then it isn't bliss. So let's try to come to the end here and look at trying to picture this inner child. So because I do believe that when I say we are the children, I mean that in quite a sort of literal way, that the best of us are like children. And when I am at my best, I have that childlike nature. I have the childlike behavior. As I have those attitudes in my life, I am reliably most proud of those decisions that I take then. When I am playful, I think we don't have those same regrets. So, anyway, let's just look at me picturing my inner child. Because in my mind, I picture the being of my daughter as a kind of entity living within me, as a potential or as a guide to a way of being. My daughter's desire and need to play is so powerful that it will take over if she is left alone to do any task for more than a minute, possibly less. And when I ask her to go and brush her teeth, she'll get distracted in play before she even gets to the bathroom. I'll remind her again about the brushing of the teeth, and she'll remember and go into the bathroom, but will most likely fall into play or curiously pick up something from the trash and start playing with it, or with some sort of one of my wife's mysterious makeup tools, even before the toothbrush is out and the cup and the toothpaste reaches the brush. No, the toothbrush is out of the cup and the toothbrush reaches the brush. It's a rare day indeed that she actually puts toothpaste on a toothbrush and starts brushing without needing to be reminded at least twice. If she gets started then if we are lucky, the brushing might continue for maybe 1 minute before play breaks out again. It's almost scary how powerful the impulse is. And maybe this is part of the reason why I see this instinct. I see it as we're not all created equal. We are all have our own propensities. Well, we all have equal rights and all that sort of stuff. But for things to be equal doesn't mean that everybody is the same and all that. It's so when I see it in her, that she has the play instinct so strong, and when I'm asking her for the 6th time to finish brushing and pay attention to what she's doing, I try to remind myself that all this play is wiring her brain and making her smarter and make her better equipped to take on the tumultuous and ever-changing challenges of life. But it's not easy. But one way that I do this is to try to internalize the sage, internalize the wiseness, this state of being that she has, to remind myself not just that I too was like this, but that I will become a better person and a better artist if I nurture and comfort that part of me which is like her. So without apology, I repeat, the question that should be asked by the adult to the child is not, when will you become like me, but how did I ever lose the ability to be like you? And adding that crucial next question, how can I awake you in me again? And there we go. And I hope that these in-depth explorations and the continuing exploration of play and the deep link that it has with showmanship, but also the deep link that play has with us as human beings, that will enrich your life and enrich your relationship to yourself, to your craft, because that's our kind of our vehicle for playing, not just after work, but to actually change our work into play, which we're going to talk about in the future. But I really hope that all this exploration, as abstract as it might be, I try to concretize it and to give you both ideas that can float around you and that can back you up in a conversation, or when the question is asked, can you make a living from this? It's like, can you make a life from this? Is this something that you go, oh yeah, let me tell you. I hope that this stays true for you as well. And that it actually lies there as a kind of what can we call it? Like a reservoir of good feelings and intellectual, emotional, and actionable potential. Yeah, that would be excellent. So, and I'm hoping that this is like, because when asked, by this guy, this publisher, it's like, what is it? What is the goal of it, or whatever? And these ideas aren't really there to improve your act in this way or that way. I guess it is to increase your understanding of what it means to be a performer. So I have a tendency to have a person in mind when I'm doing these things, and I guess that person is a professional performer. But I think this kind of thought can actually make anyone's life a better. And I think that your relationship, getting yourself into a right relationship with yourself and the world and with our work, the craft of playfully presenting material for other people will be enriched by keeping this depth of the link between showmanship and play in mind. I certainly hope so. But with all that said, all that's left to be said is take care of yourself and those you love, and I hope to see you along the way.